It was one of those nights when the sky seemed angry rain pounding so hard you could barely see your own footsteps. Naomi Carter had just finished another late shift at the small corner grocery where she worked. Her jacket was thin, her shoes soaked, and all she wanted was to get home, warm up a can of soup, and make sure her mother had taken her medicine. But fate doesn't ask permission before it turns your life upside down. Naomi was halfway down a dim street when she noticed movement in the blur of headlights. A tiny figure darted out, arms flailing, hair plastered to her face by the storm. A little girl couldn't have been more than 7, running straight into the path of a speeding delivery truck. Naomi's stomach knotted. The sound of squealing brakes cut through the rain, but the road was too slick too late. Without thinking, she dropped the bag of groceries from her hand, milk shattering cans, rolling into the gutter, and lunged forward. Water splashed up her legs as she wrapped her arms around the child, pulling her tight. The truck skidded, horn-blaring tires burning against asphalt. The two of them toppled into a puddle, mud splashing up Naomi's sleeves. The girl clung to her waist, trembling so hard Naomi felt her ribs vibrate. Naomi whispered, barely able to breathe herself, "You're safe, sweetheart. I've got you." Around them, people gathered umbrellas, popping open, voices rising in panic and relief. Someone threw a blanket over their shoulders. An older woman bent down, her voice shaky but kind. "You're an angel, child. You didn't even hesitate." Naomi just shook her head. She hadn't thought she'd only moved. Then came a voice that cut through the storm, raw with terror. "Lila." A tall man shoved through the crowd, his suit jacket plastered to his frame, eyes wide with fear. He scooped the little girl into his arms, clutching her as though she might vanish if he loosened his grip. His daughter's voice quivered as she said, "Daddy, she saved me." He turned, then his gaze locking with Naomi's. This drenched grocery clerk, still kneeling in the puddle, hands scraped, chest heaving. The gratitude in his eyes was fierce, unspoken. But Naomi, still shaking, only whispered, "She's safe. That's all that matters." And before he could speak, before the crowd pressed in, she stood, gathered what was left of her groceries, and walked away into the curtain of rain. That man was Grant Ellison, one of the wealthiest developers in the state, though Naomi had no idea. She only knew she had a stack of bills waiting at home and a sick mother to care for. But Grant, he couldn't forget her. That night, after his daughter finally slept, he sat in his study, restless. He searched until her name surfaced. Naomi Carter, 34, a woman who once studied law but left school when her mother fell ill. A woman whose life had narrowed into fluorescent lights, price scanners, and endless bills. A stranger, yet the reason his daughter was still alive. The next day, Naomi was back behind the counter scanning groceries with practiced rhythm. Her uniform polo was faded, her apron frayed, but her posture was steady. That's when she saw him. A tall man out of place among discount signs and buzzing neon lights. Grant approached with an envelope in hand. "Please," he said quietly, "it's just a way to say thank you." Naomi glanced at the envelope, then at him, then slowly shook her head. "I don't need that," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "Yesterday wasn't about money. Just make sure your little girl never feels alone." Grant blinked, stunned. People around slowed, sensing something deeper than an exchange at Register 3. Naomi continued, softer now. "I once wanted to be a lawyer to fight for kids who didn't have a voice. But life had other plans. I take care of my mom now. I do what I can." Grant tucked the envelope back into his jacket, his throat tight. He realized this woman wasn't just brave, she carried a quiet strength that humbled him. But it wasn't Grant who came back first. It was Lila. A few days later, she tugged her father to the grocery store, dragging him by the hand. As soon as she saw Naomi, she bolted to the counter, wrapping tiny arms around her waist. "Miss Naomi," she squealed, "I made you a drawing." And there it was, crayon stick figures, a tall man, a little girl, and a smiling woman. At the bottom, her own name scrawled in crooked letters. Naomi knelt down, her chest tight as she smoothed the paper. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you." From then on, Lila wouldn't let go. She wanted Naomi at the park, at the library, even at bedtime stories. Naomi resisted at first. What would people say, a grocery clerk in the orbit of a millionaire? But when Grant asked her one evening if she still dreamed of helping kids, she admitted, "Wanting and being able are two different things. Dreams don't pay hospital bills." Grant's reply was quiet. "What if we start small, a safe space for kids, reading circles, listening ears? Not my name on it. Yours." Naomi studied him. For the first time in years, she felt something stirring, a flicker of the dream she thought she'd buried. But not everyone welcomed her presence. Margaret Ellison Grant's mother-in-law and Lila's grandmother watched with growing unease. She had already lost her daughter Emily, Lila's mother, and she wasn't about to watch another woman step into her place. At family gatherings, she whispered sharp comments. At church luncheons, she bristled at the sight of Lila clinging to the woman from the grocery store. Finally, one afternoon, Margaret stormed into Grant's home to find Naomi reading on the rug with Lila nestled against her. Her voice was sharp as glass. "Don't you dare think you can replace my daughter." The room froze. Naomi closed the book gently, lifted her chin, and said quietly, "I would never try. I know I could never be her. But Lila deserves to know she's not alone." Lila's small voice cut in, trembling. "But Grandma," she makes me smile again. The words hung in the air, silencing even Margaret. Grant, standing in the doorway, felt the weight of a choice pressing down on him, clinging to grief or stepping into something new. That choice came to a head at the annual Lantern Festival, a community event Grant quietly sponsored. Lanterns lined the park, each carrying prayers, memories, dreams. Grant gave a speech about resilience and community, his voice steady. But it was Lila who tugged Naomi on stage, insisting she read with her. Naomi hesitated, but when the microphone was placed in her hand, her voice found rhythm, low, steady, warm. She read a simple poem inviting Lila to join. The crowd leaned in laughing when the child mispronounced a word, applauding when Naomi kissed her hair and encouraged her to try again. It wasn't performance, it was presence. But Margaret's voice cut through the applause like a knife. "This is just a show. You're using her for your ambition, Grant. She'll never be Emily." Gasps rippled. Naomi stepped forward, still holding Lila close. "You're right. I'll never be Emily. She was your daughter and Lila's mother. Nothing I do could change that. But I don't need to replace her. I only need to help this little girl feel safe, feel seen. That's what matters." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Lila whispering to her grandmother, "Grandma." Mommy would want me to smile. Margaret's throat tightened. For the first time, her anger cracked into grief. Tears welled as she whispered, "Maybe you're giving back what Emily no longer can." And when the lanterns were released that night, Naomi, Grant, and Lila stood together beneath the rising glow. Margaret lingered, then stepped forward when Lila called her. Together they lifted one lantern, 3 generations bound not by blood alone, but by shared loss, fragile hope, and the possibility of healing. That night, as hundreds of lanterns floated into the dark sky, Naomi looked up, and for the first time in years, allowed herself to believe she wasn't just surviving. She was part of something bigger, a new beginning. But here's the question. What would you have done if you were Margaret? Would you see Naomi as a threat or as a blessing? And do you believe someone's background, someone's job should ever decide whether they're worthy of love, family, and respect? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this story isn't just about Naomi or Grant. It's about every one of us and how we choose to see the people who step into our lives when we least expect it. And if you felt something in your heart while listening, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and share this video, because sometimes the stories that change us most are the ones we never saw coming.